Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, life, it's diverse. That's what makes it interesting. When you have a monoculture, it's dangerously monochromatic. Like when you have only one strain of banana and the banana gets sick and now there's no more bananas because there's no more diversity. What am I talking about? Let's talk with Stacy.
At first, I thought you were talking about transitory, that life is transitory, unlike inflation, which isn't permanent. And then you talked about bananas, and I thought you were talking about altcoins and cryptocurrency and modern art. But no, you're talking, I believe, about this first headline here. And that is a tweet from Glenn Greenwald. And he is quoting something from MSNBC, a conversation that happened on MSNBC last weekend. Removing people from these social media platforms works, and we need to keep doing it and doing it more aggressively. This was the DCC's Kurt Bardella to Joy Ann Reid. Glenn Greenwald says more and more censorship of political speech is a top priority of American liberalism. So the DCC, the DCCC, is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, according to their own website, the official campaign arm of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, the only political committee in the country whose principal mission is to support Democratic House candidates every step of the way to fortify and expand our new Democratic majority. So what they want to do is permanently remove more and more people and do it more aggressively from social media, our modern day public square.
Right. It goes against the life force, which is all about diversity and mutations that create possible survival in a constantly changing environment. And colors, there are millions and millions of colors. And opinions, there are many. And the way people shade their opinions and express their opinions, and artistic expression, and painters and sculptors and dancers. And you put it all together and it forms life. So this idea of adding more censoring to social media, you end up with gray goo coming out of the orifice of political hacks that want to just cover the world in 9 feet of gray goo of nonsense. Why? Because they're greedy. Ultimately, Joy Reid and the DCCC and everybody on that side, they see the free candy that coming from being social misfits, and by being not social misfits, but by being totalitarian. And totalitarianism has never paid more than it does today. So there's Joy Reid. I'm a totalitarian and give me my money. So greedy, so disgusting, so deplorable. It makes me want to vomit.
So talking about artistic expression and gray goo is, I do want to note that I am wearing the same pink jacket that I wore last episode. And the reason is because it is quite fashionable at the moment in Paris. We are in Paris, the fashion capital of the world. So I do want to look fashionable. I do have a different pair of trousers on. Just for the audience out there, I know they like to go into YouTube.
What color is that?
This is pink.
I think it's more of a fuchsia.
That's good for you. But in terms of totalitarianism, I want to talk about where this could be going because, we're at a cycle of the Thucydides trap, which we've talked about. The declining power confronts the rising power, and the way power acts like a force, right? It's like magnetic. It has its own gravity. So it does start to alter the behavior of everybody in the world. So look at what the DCCC is doing, what the Democratic Party's stated aims. They say they want to aggressively remove more people from the internet. So I'm going to look at a headline the same exact day. It was posted on the Wall Street Journal that these people were on MSNBC, which is a Democratic favoring media in the United States, saying that they want to take people, deplatform people permanently as well. China's biggest movie star was erased from the internet. And the mystery is why. Zhao Wei was the Reese Witherspoon of China. Then she was censored by the Communist Party amid a clampdown of the country's entertainment industry. She spent 2 decades as a huge star there, as an actress, writer, director. She directed award-winning films, sold millions of records as pop singer, and built a large following on social media, amassing 86 million fans on Weibo, China's Twitter-like microblogging site. She also made a fortune as an investor in Chinese technology and entertainment companies. Today, the 45-year-old star has been erased from the Chinese internet. Searches for her name on the country's biggest video streaming sites come up blank. Her projects, including the wildly popular TV series My Fair Princess, have been removed. Anyone looking up her acclaimed film So Young on China's equivalent of Wikipedia wouldn't know she was the director. The field now reads blank.
Again, China has a habit of making really stupid mistakes throughout its history. Like they burnt down their treasure fleet 500 years ago. They kicked the Bitcoin miners out of the country recently. And now they are, they have cultural diversity is life, as I've said at the beginning of the show. Cultural monopoly and cultural stagnation leads to political and economic stagnation. The only way China's economy is going to thrive is if they encourage diversity in all aspects of culture. But they get greedy. That's it. That's the story of China is GREED, big red flag, greed. And it's once again showing its ugly face, and it's going to end tragically for those people.
What I find about the story is that when Joe Biden was at the forefront of this, when we brought China into the WTO in 2001, the argument to the American population was that we would inspire them to become Democrats, to become democracy, to open up, to find enlightenment, to do all this stuff. We said we, the exceptional people, would inspire them. Instead, we have on MSNBC a headline I just read where they sound remarkably like what has happened to this woman who disappeared from all the internet on August 26th. It was a coordinated takedown. We've had coordinated takedowns in the West, in the United States. Julian Assange, Alex Jones, President Trump, the freaking president of the United States, was deplatformed, disappeared, and removed memory hold. Memory holding is totalitarianism. Read George Orwell. He was writing and existing in the 1930s leading up to the atrocities of World War II. He talked about this sort of thing. This is what they tried to erase history. In terms of the U.S. Commentators on this story in Wall Street Journal, they interviewed Stanley Rosen, a professor at the University of Southern California, who specializes in Chinese films and politics. He said, Zhao Wei is a poster child for what the Communist Party sees as what's wrong with celebrity culture in China. It's a demonstration that no one, no matter how wealthy or popular, is too big to pursue. So again, she only had 86 million followers. I think Trump had even more. He was also the president of the United States, and he got disappeared from the internet. So, there's a similarity that's going on. She disappeared on August 26th. Trump, I think, disappeared a month or two earlier from the internet. So no matter how big, no matter how powerful you are, that's what the same message is to Joe Bag of Donuts out there tweeting on the internet. Maybe something that this person says might have them disappeared. And the warning is that if they could disappear Trump, they could disappear you.
The thing is that the U.S., by shipping all of its manufacturing jobs and factories to China, starting 30, 35 years ago, was happily becoming a vassal of China. So the U.S. is not really a good example of anything anymore. So the fact that the U.S. would be mimicking this deplatforming that we see in communist China should be no surprise, because we gave up our liberties, so to speak, long ago. So it's unfortunate, but as you point out there, the reason why they're doing this, again, is out of jealousy. There's a celebrity, they're getting more hits on social media, so the government deletes them. It's very petty. There's no economic reason for it. It's a matter of fact, it'll destroy their economy. And it's a repetition of history. We've seen this now for thousands of years with China. It's very silly.
My point is that the U.S. is mimicking them. Our elites are mimicking there. One of the explanations for what's going on there is, like, for example, the children of the celebrities are banned now from appearing on television. They can't go on all the game shows and stuff like that. Because they're becoming their own power center, just like the Catholic Church. What they did, they introduced into Christianity the notion that priests can't marry because the priests were having children and building up their own power bases against the Vatican. So it's the same sort of thing. They're trying to remove power centers, alternative, huge, sort of robber baron power centers.
They're trying to control the life force.
Yes.
Of humans, of planet Earth, of the universe. And it never ends well. When you go against the cosmic life force by becoming an authoritarianism, it always ends tragically. And the U.S. Had a lot of creative juice, for decades. And there was the American century and all that. And but when they shipped all their factory jobs over to China, they waved the red flag and said, "We quit. We're no longer viable. Leave us alone. We just want to, sit here with our really cheap TVs made in China and the cheap clothes made in Vietnam and just eat all this cheap food. And thanks for the fentanyl. We're happy."
The force, the power that is China attracting the elite of the United States to alter their behavior. Here's another headline. We kind of touched on it previously, but here's a good quote to show the similarities in terms of how the power is mimicking each other in these two countries. Oil market. This is a quote from Joe Biden. "We're also going after the bad actors." China's literally doing that, going after the actors, the celebrities. But here, the bad actors in the oil market he's talking about, and pandemic profiteers on our economy. There's lots of evidence that gas prices, and by gas prices, the president means gasoline prices, should be going down, but they haven't, says President Biden. We're taking a close look at that. So gasoline prices, petrol prices are going up. Somebody's got to pay for this. It's not the Fed. It's not.
No, hey, Joe, go over to the Eccles building where the Federal Reserve Bank is and ask them to stop printing money. Problem solved. Going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Harry Halpin of the Nym Project. He's the CEO. Harry, nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. I have to admit, we are somehow still working on this project. I think I talked to you 2 years ago about privacy and Tor. And now, the world's just gone to hell in a handbasket, but we're holding in there and still trying to put up the fight.
Right. I guess the big news, we'll get right into it, is that you've hired Chelsea Manning. Okay, so tell us more. What you doing?
Yeah, so, like 2 years ago when we talked, Nym we had a lot of research papers, we had some kind of demo code, but we weren't like really close to actually getting it working. So for those of you who don't know what Nym is, it's a privacy project whose job is to make any communication resistant to mass surveillance. And weirdly enough, when I was fundraising for Nym, like this is ages so long ago, years ago, way before our interview, Chelsea Manning showed up at one of the funding events. And then we talked, and I was actually really surprised that she was actually really intelligent, like knew about, for example, post-quantum cryptography, was very concerned over mass surveillance, was actually a Rust programmer, which it's very hard to find Rust programmers nowadays. So when we're getting ready to like launch our system, we had this, which we haven't done yet, but we're getting close, I would say by end of the year. We're getting concerned over a real world threat model. So in crypto, like your threat is essentially the government running a giant machine and trying to break your key, like somehow guess your key, which is why your key has to be so long. But what we're doing is we're hiding traffic. We're like hiding the metadata of your traffic. And that involves creating fake traffic. It involves kind of guessing government and other companies' surveillance capabilities. It involves a lot of, to be honest, very real, kind of like very hard issues that we don't know exactly what the right design is. And we discovered that Chelsea had been thinking about this stuff since she was in jail, believe it or not. And so we hired her to kind of inspect our system and make sure there's no weaknesses. Because there's very few people, honestly, who are from the inside of a government that will actually kind of do something as crazy as Chelsea did, get out, be able to tell the story, and then actually be like technically competent enough to look at systems and be like, oh yeah, I think this can or can't actually resist not just theoretical cryptographic adversaries, but the actual government adversary that we're very worried about.
Right, and I guess the nearest thing to it would be Tor. And so how is it similar? How is it different? What is Tor for those who don't know?
Yeah, so Tor is great. So Tor is a project whose goal is to basically prevent you from leaking your IP address. So it takes your packet, sends it to another computer. There's like 3 hops, and then it sends out the last computer. And so that was used, for example, by WikiLeaks. It was used by Snowden. It is actually probably the best way to hide your IP address, and by a long shot, on the internet compared to any of these kind of weird VPNs or decentralized VPNs. I use Tor every day, but there's a weakness with Tor. When Tor was made, the internet was a little bit slower. So they really had to concentrate on speed, and it was more expensive. But you can imagine the problem is if I want to attack Tor, I kind of look at the inputs, all the traffic coming into the first hop. I look at all the traffic coming on like the last hop, the hop out, and I focus on that traffic, and I can detect patterns in that traffic and use that to de-anonymize Tor. So what we have done is we basically said, well, why don't we mix the packets like a deck of cards? We mix them up, and we will add fake traffic. And the combination of these two things is kind of what gives us an edge against mass surveillance. So while Tor probably, I believe, remain about as good as you can get for web browsing, for things like Bitcoin transactions or Signal instant messages, Nym will definitely have an edge.
Right. So getting back to Chelsea Manning, she's like a white hat hacker in a sense.
Yeah,
you bring her in to really stress test it and to be on that side. So her skills, you're saying she programs Rust, and she's quite conversant in a number of different languages. I mean, this is a remarkable talent forged in the fire of very activist protests and making an incredible sacrifice in terms of actually spending time in jail. So now the company going forward, you've got Chelsea on board. Is the company at a place where it's really seeking a profit model, or do you consider it more of a public service?
I mean, we're still basically going to aim to build a public service, but the problem is we don't want to become dependent on charity. We don't become dependent on government funding. We don't want to become dependent on goodwill.
Okay, let me ask you this. When you see a country like El Salvador become Bitcoin as legal tender, and they've clearly taken on the empire, they are going against the grain. They're saying, you know what, we don't want the US dollar. We don't want US dollar interference. And now the US dollar's diplomatic efforts around the world are absolutely shambolic. You see it's happening with France, Australia, Great Britain. Things are really falling apart diplomatically for the US. China is asserting itself. So in the case of Nym, is it something that a sovereign might be interested in?
Well, that's what we're hoping. Originally, we built the system based on funds from the European Commission because Angela Merkel was like, oh hell, the NSA is spying on me. What am I going to do? So that gave us the initial kind of funding to get things started. And now what we hope to do is we have to take all the funding and money from the cryptocurrency space, from Bitcoin and other countries that are moving against this kind of tide of just neoliberalism in general, and use that as our kind of funding motor. So we do think governments like El Salvador will be interested. We've already have very good relations with the Swiss government, because obviously privacy is a big deal for Switzerland and Swiss banks. People like Chelsea and whistleblowers and human rights activists in general should be interested.
Okay, human rights. How come people like Glenn Greenwald are not pro or talk about Bitcoin when it's such an obvious human rights play? In your view, I realize it's a subjective idea.
I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of people honestly sounds crazy, but they have these concerns over electrical energy expenditure. They have concerns over, it's like a Ponzi scheme. And I honestly think it's just because they don't understand Bitcoin.
But in the case of Glenn Greenwald, he's such a forensically minded, detail-oriented, legal mind guy who gets into the weeds and really looks at stuff in a thorough manner. I mean, most of the FUD, whether it's energy or others, can be pretty, dispensed with within a matter of minutes for someone who can really think through this thing. And let me just switch gears for a second. In the U.S., the left cable news channels like MSNBC recently argued that deplorables, MAGA, anti-COVID lockdown sorts should not be allowed to use the internet at all. Okay, China operates a formal social credit score system. It seems like the U.S. is going the way of China, or is that too much?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, the problem is all this push for vaccine passports, mandatory vaccines. It's just a drive to a surveillance state. And Nym is a way to fight back against that. Bitcoin is a way to fight back against that. And the surveillance state work, which the US and France and other countries are doing, is very dangerous. So for example, even to eat in a restaurant, I have to show a COVID passport, which effectively can record my name, which restaurant I was going to, throughout my entire life. And they're never going to get rid of this infrastructure. This infrastructure, which they built temporarily to stop COVID, is probably going to become a permanent feature of our daily lives. And so right now is really the time for people that work on technology to build anonymous, privacy-enhanced alternatives to push for its support and to get support, honestly, from everyone. I got vaccinated, but I went all the way back to the US just to get vaccinated in the United States because I didn't want to have to carry around a QR code that could track me everywhere. And I think this is really the most serious defining technological moment of our generation after Bitcoin. It's going to be the fight against COVID-enabled surveillance, because they've got everyone scared about being safe, when in reality, people are going to trade away their freedom for safety. And
right, and there's nothing even useful being recorded, like, for example, if somebody has a nut allergy.
Oh, yeah.
Like that would be useful. Like I show up at a restaurant and, I'm allergic to nuts. It's like a biomedical, something useful. But no, it's just, what is the term surveillance industrial complex? What does that mean?
Yeah, we just to go back to the nuts, we have the technology. In fact, the cypherpunks, around the same time they invented a lot of the early work on digital cash and mixed nets like Nym, they invented this thing called anonymous credentials. Anonymous credentials let you prove, kind of like a zero-knowledge proof, something without revealing extra. Right? You can reveal, oh, I'm allergic to nuts, or oh, I got a COVID vaccine, or I got a test 3 days ago, without revealing your birthday and everything, all this other stuff which they're collecting. So I think like these kinds of technologies, which are I think the forgotten legacy of the cypherpunks, need to be brought back and work with cryptocurrency to really enable a new realm of human freedom in this encroaching surveillance state.
Right, and all of the data that is collected, it goes into databases, and those databases are routinely hacked because the government hackers, the government programmers are not on a level of a Chelsea Manning. They're not on a high level of expertise. They've got really low-level bureaucrats cranking away at some code, which is easily hacked, and that poses a high security threat right there. But they don't seem to care because they can just print lots of money, which gets us back to the importance of Bitcoin. Now, the argument in the U.S. is that if the deplorables violate the terms of service, then it's not, in fact, free speech issue to force them off the internet. So this gets into this idea where corporations have the right to do whatever they want. It's not a free speech issue because they've got right. We've seen several coordinated takedowns of individuals in a manner similar to that, what happened to Julian Assange. Will Nym help prevent this sort of corporate erasure of individuals? I assume the answer would be yes, but what do you think about this idea, essentially, of corporations? Because it's a corporation, they can simply bypass all human rights and all rights.
Well, you don't have any rights when you use Twitter, when you use Facebook, you use Google. It's their private property. It's like you came into my house and you said something I didn't like, I can throw you out. But the problem is this house essentially is now the primary way, Twitter, Facebook, Google, that we all communicate. So,
right, but if they're doing the bidding of the government, as they do, Twitter, et cetera, aren't they an arm of the government? This idea that they're private corporations is fallacious.
Oh, like with Eric Schmidt in the U.S. government, there's a kind of revolving door of people going into the White House, back into the private sector. This happened historically with the U.S. military, who've wasted far much more money and electricity than Bitcoin has. And what we're seeing now is that we need to basically move away from this kind of large private infrastructure, which we're dependent on, and build our own kind of self-sovereign, autonomous infrastructure. Sort of, so in Bitcoin, if you have your private key, right, and you keep that safe, no one can take your Bitcoin away. We need to have something very similar for social media, because I may not agree.
Right. So Nym, essentially, that's Nym's mission statement.
It's definitely one of the things we want to help with. We're a small bit of the puzzle. We're like a finger in a larger fist. So we're not going to build like the next Twitter or the next decentralized Twitter, but we will build an ability for people who are under government repression or state suppression, or just people who might not agree with the mainstream dissent, to communicate to the next Twitter.
All right, Harry Halpin, got to cut it off there. Thanks for being on Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Want to thank our guest, Harry Halpin of the Nym Project. Until next time, bye, y'all.